So, in the wake of the Venezuela attack, the president and his little minions are speculating about all the places they think they can go next, all the countries they think that they can invade, all the leaders they think they can depose. They very clearly see themselves as masters of the hemisphere at the very least, and that there is no place, no territory in the Western Hemisphere that isn't or shouldn't be theirs for the taking.
Incredible thing last night of letting somebody else take over where we have to do it again. We can do it again, too. Nobody can stop us.
They've even begun talking about annexing Greenland again, which, if this were to happen, would be a catastrophic event, something that would herald the end of NATO, certainly, and would really mean a return to the worst of kind of the great power behavior of the late 19th and early 20th century. Not a particularly stable time for the world, if you were not aware. And the thing is that all of this could end tomorrow if Congress, and by which I mean Republicans in Congress, put an end to it. Tomorrow, Mike Johnson and John Thune, if they wanted to, could put a bill on the floor, have it voted on. If passed, they could defund the administration's efforts here. And if the president vetoed it, then Congress should override the veto, right? Like that's all in the constitutional order. And even if they were not going to go as far as to put a bill to the floor to vote on it, Republicans in Congress could exert real pressure. They could demand answers. They could demand explanations. But they've done none of this. They've done absolutely none of it. They don't care. I'm not even sure that they're really all that committed to the actual course of action here. And I'm sure some of them privately don't like it, but they're not going to do anything about it. They're not going to push back. They're not going to say no. They're going to continue being little good. They're going to continue being good little soldiers for the president. They don't see themselves as occupying an office, occupying an institution that has some role to play in counterbalancing the White House, counterbalancing the president. They see themselves as basically adjuncts to the president, people whose actual job is just to do his bidding whenever he says do something. When he says jump, their only response should be how high. You can say, what about Democrats? And I have plenty of critique for how Democrats have handled messaging here. Although I'll just say this, as someone who was very much aware of politics during the Iraq War, this crop of Democrats is vastly superior to the ones who were around when Bush was in office, who were falling over themselves to support the war in Iraq.
It is clear, however, that if left unchecked, Saddam Hussein will continue to increase his capacity to wage biological and chemical warfare and will keep trying to develop nuclear weapons.
There's been much, much, much more, like an order of magnitude, more dissent and anger and opposition to these operations than what we saw from Democrats in 2002 through 2003, even to 2004. So I'll give them that. But you can say, what about Democrats? And the fact of the matter is that the Democratic Party doesn't hold power in the federal government right now. There's like nothing substantively Democrats can do. They can introduce impeachment resolutions, which are privileged on the floor. They can do that. And that, I think that would be effective messaging to get across how serious this is. But in terms of concrete ability to stop something, that's just not in the cards right now. That's what it means for one party to control Washington, right? That's what that looks like. And so the blame here, the culpability really lies with congressional Republicans. And I understand that it's actually quite tempting to want to say just Congress, because, Congress often sucks. Congress is often terrible. But it's congressional Republicans. It's Republicans who have abdicated their constitutional authority. It's Republicans who have made Article 1 of the Constitution, which is the Constitution that deals with Congress, essentially a nullity. It's Republicans. And if you look back at the last 25 years of American politics, what you clearly see is that for all of the many, many flaws of the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, which has agency, right, which isn't some force of nature, which isn't some, immovable object, which is made up of people, individuals who are exercising their own judgment, who are making choices. The Republican Party is the bulk of the reason why American politics is so dysfunctional. The Republican Party in Congress, the Republican Party in the White House, the Republican Party in the Supreme Court, all together are acting in ways that have broken American politics in pretty profound ways. Donald Trump would not be president. I believe this very strongly. Donald Trump would not be president if the Republican Party in 2015 were strong enough to keep him off the field. The Republican Party's dysfunction, its extremism, its contempt for governance, it's why we're here, straightforwardly. And even the inability of Congress to do anything reflects the fact that Republicans at this point are a generation into being a party that just doesn't care about governance, that doesn't cultivate any real interest in governance. If you are a Republican legislator and you want to govern, there's no one there for you. There are no partners. You have to work with Democrats, basically. There's a reason why the more moderate coded, although they're still quite conservative, they just like care about actually doing things, those Republicans have just systematically left office. Part of it is that, yeah, they face pressure from primaries, but part of it was that just that there's nothing to do. Even when they control Congress, even when they're in power, there's nothing to do. Look at this Congress right now. They've passed basically one bill in terms of Republican agenda items, and that's the big, beautiful bill, which is just a tax cut. And getting Republicans to pass a tax cut is like getting your dog to eat shit off the floor, right? Like, getting a Republican to pass tax cuts is the easiest thing in the world. So I barely consider the big beautiful bill to be like a meaningful piece of legislation. No, they've done nothing. The only other real piece of legislation that's been passed is the Epstein bill, which they didn't want to do, which was forced onto the party by its more dissident members. And so that's where we are right now, that until there is a change of power in Congress, the Trump administration has close to free reign to run wild. There are limits to this. There are practical limits when it comes to governance. You're seeing this with the ICE deportations. There's actual physical limit to how many people can be deported. When it comes to recruits, there are limits to sort of the ability of the personnel to carry out the duties they've been tasked with. So you got that. There are practical limits. But in terms of ideation and attempts to make that ideation real, in the absence of a Republican Party that wants to put any limits on the president whatsoever, there's not really that much you can do. And I'll say that this is a natural consequence of where conservative ideology has been going for a very long time. Much of the modern Republican Party, much of the modern conservative movement was born in the wake of Watergate, in the wake of Nixon's resignation. That really was a kind of profound psychic injury to a whole generation of conservatives. And you can really understand one of the important projects of the Republican Party and the conservative movement since Watergate has been to make sure that Watergate can happen again, that the next president who wants to abuse their power for the sake of national security or for the sake of the national interest can do so without any kind of opposition or meaningful obstacle from any other branch of government. That was Iran-Contra. That was Trump v. US. That was John Roberts essentially saying that, hey, you get to do another Watergate if you want to. So it's not just that Republicans won't do something, it's not just that they can't, it's that they've organized themselves around making sure that this is what happens. This right here, what we're living through, this is the consequence of giving Republicans power.